And the type of person that I am can reflect to the people that I train and inspire as well.
Yeah.
And how does that make me feel?
Awesome. Yeah.
It makes me feel awesome.
It kind of feeds itself.
Yeah.
It fuels you.
It fuels me because I'm fueling other people.
Big benefit from
You
doing just that. Yeah.
You do.
Oh.
I remember the first time I had a client write me a letter. She wrote me a letter, and she couldn't even hand it to me. She was like crying when she handed it to me.
Okay.
And she had lost 70 pounds in a year. And I don't know if Mandy is listening to this, but Mandy Stallings, she hands me this letter, and she's like, I can't even express in words what you've done for me. And just the changes that I went through and all that kind of stuff, you being there, being my coach and helping me out. I wish I had the letter right in front of me to read it, but like I started crying.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I'm like, that feeling was so overwhelming that I knew that this is a part of my
You knew it was
purpose.
right. Uh-huh.
That this is my path. This is what I need to do for people. Because had I not been there for her, she wouldn't have been able to have that experience.
No.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I would love to be a tool to help bless other people's lives.
And it's interesting what people take away from certain situations. Like, you never know what can affect a person, and just being nice or smiling or something like that can change someone's whole entire day.
Totally. And then they can take that smile and pass it on to someone else, and
sure.
it just makes.
So every once in a while, take off your freaking
mask
and smile at somebody.
But then you'll
act like you're putting some food in your mouth and smile at somebody. And come on,
you got to really use your eyes to smile these days.
Yeah, you do. You do.
Okay, that's awesome. So the last one on this page is Shane. What has the challenge of a brain injury taught you? What positives would you say has come from it?
So much positive has came from my brain injury, like this podcast, for example, and everything. Like, I constantly am thinking about my brain injury. For example, I did stem cell treatment in California, and
a trial.
Yeah, like a medical trial, and I got so much out of that situation, and I learned so much about myself, and I was able to go on a trip like every 3 months,
to
to San Diego, and
That's great.
But and so that's something you would not have done.
No,
and you had a lot of experiences, met a lot of awesome people. You wouldn't have met John.
No,
right.
I doubt if you. I mean, you did go to the gym before your brain injury, but it was usually after work in the evening.
But
you go,
I wouldn't have been looking for a personal trainer.
It's true.
No,
Yeah.
you wouldn't. So,
So he's even gained humility. He's gained friendships.
So much.
He's gained a business,
a perspective
And
on
huge
life.
perspective on
I've also gained who to cut out of my life, and what examples not to follow.
Yeah.
Like, before my brain injury, I was kind of a shitty person. Like,
well, basically, Shane was always a really good person.
well, yeah.
The core is
The core
is
is good.
He made some poor choices
Shitty,
and had
yes.
some friends, and a lot of times his friends were just like him, but they needed a friend, and Shane was their friend, but he would kind of go down to their level instead of raising them up, you know.
Sure.
So he was a good friend, too good of a friend. I think about through the many experiences, he has lost so many possessions.
Yeah.
You know,
Being
get
screwed over.
ripped off. But he always never held a grudge for that.
That's a good thing.
It's just, well, that's life, I guess, and move on. I don't know, and I guess probably learn from some of those experiences gradually, eventually, but never really changed into the person who he is now.
Right.
Until he
brain
started
injury.
to look outward after the brain injury.
Yeah,
Right.
pretty much until you had to.
Right,
Yeah.
until you had to.
You know,
Like you said, that was your two choices to get up and go or lay there and
Die.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so, all right, John,
Okay.
on this, what about you? The challenges, what positives would you say have come from your challenges? And you've kind of touched on some, I think.
Yeah, I'd say for sure. Had I not been able to get through a lot of the struggles and challenges that I went through, I wouldn't have become the person that I have become. I wouldn't be that influence.
My
to other people.
perception of this is you wouldn't have been able to teach others that mindset.
Right.
Yeah.
You have to gain it before you
Yes.
can share it.
Yeah. And we talked about this in our last podcast, how with jiu-jitsu, it's the same type of thing. Like you go through this process and you are becoming better.
Yeah.
But then you're put into a position where you start to teach it as well.
And the more
you become an instructor.
You live it.
the
And then
more you train that kind of mentality, the more and more times it comes to fruition.
It's part of your life.
Yeah, I learned something in college that when you learn a new concept, if you immediately go and teach that same concept to somebody else, it would solidify the concept in you by over 20%.
Yeah.
And if you didn't go and teach it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would go and learn stuff, and then I would come home and I would teach it to my wife.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of things that I would be going through, she'd be like, "Oh yeah, yeah," and she could say the same things because
That's right.
teaching her.
Yeah.
But it helped me. So it's that same thing. You get better and better, and then you teach, and then you learn more by teaching.
Yeah.
Right, and
It's
it kind
a
of goes
circle,
with what we were talking about when you write it down. When you're in elementary school and you're learning your spelling words, they say write them down. Your teacher made you write them down. Then she made you spell it out loud because hearing it, seeing it, and like you said, you learned it from in college, and then you went and taught it. It's just reinforcing it back into your brain.
Yeah.
And
So I would say what I've gained the most, and it seems like both of us through our challenges, is we have gained a mindset that wasn't really we weren't really looking for, or it wasn't available to our consciousness.
it hadn't occurred to you.
Yeah. Until we went through those things, and we've developed mindsets that now can get us through all other challenges that we can't even perceive. We don't even know what's going to happen.
Well,
That's right.
that consistency in doing something every day, like that's one of the most important things I think that people can do. No matter the situation, no matter if you are practicing a chip shot or whatever, if you put in the work, you're going to get better.
You're going to get better.
Yeah.
Yeah, you will.
That's right.
You will.
All righty, that's awesome. This next one is for John. What is VO2 max and heart rate variability, and how do you use this information to improve your cardiovascular fitness?
Okay.
Ooh.
So here's a cool story, actually. In college, I was the lab rat. So I was the one that was always willing to be like, when they said, hey, we're going to do a VO2 max test, or we're going to do a lactate threshold test or whatever, and I'll explain what those are in a second. I was the one that raised my hand and be like, me, I'll do it.
Get in there.
Yeah. And it's not fun sometimes. A lactate threshold test is horrible because you're pushed to the absolute maximum effort that you can have for the longest sustained time that you can do it. And they measure your lactic acid levels and where it spikes at what time of training.
How do they measure it? Is it a urine, blood?
No, blood.
Okay,
yeah,
blood.
They take it from your finger while you're like sprinting.
While you're going.
While you're sprinting.
Wow.
And you're hooked up to a VO2 max. So VO2 max is basically just the volume of oxygen uptake that your body can take in and utilize, and then how much CO2 you blow out.
Okay.
And they measure that by, first, the amount of oxygen that's in the air that the testing is in. And they have lots of different formulas for that, because depending on what sea level you're at or whatever. And then they have the amount of oxygen that a typical human can take in. So these aren't perfect numbers. unless you go into a lab and they measure it yourself and your lung capacity. But you put on these, you put on a mask. Okay, it has a couple tubes. One, you're bringing in the oxygen from the air, the actual air, and then the other one is measuring how much oxygen comes out, or a CO2 and oxygen comes out, right? Mm-hmm. So then that way they can get a calculation of how much you're utilizing. The more that you utilize, that indicates a higher number of VO2 max. And if you have a high VO2 max, it indicates a fitness level. Like you're really fit if it's like in the 70s, okay?
What would be average?
So 79 was Lance Armstrong.
Oh.
And that's a pretty...
That's pretty.
Yeah. And that's because he was a big thing back then. I know he's been,
had
But
gone
who
through
hasn't?
right.
But who hasn't been using drugs and stuff like that? Anyways, he had an amazing lung capacity, regardless, and work ethic. But it might have been unethical. Anyways, okay, we're not going to talk about Lance. But they said like average runners, Olympic runners, and things like that would be in the high 60s, low 70s. Cyclists usually are not in the 70s because you're not using as much oxygen. When you run, you use more oxygen because there's more muscles involved. The more muscles involved, the more oxygen is used, right? So a cyclist, it's mostly your quads and a little bit in your calves. So you're not using as much. So it was remarkable to see him have such a high one.
Right.
So my best test was in the high 60s, like a 68, 69 for my volume of oxygen uptake. So how do you can use this information. I actually don't use it in my practice, in my training, because it's really only for measuring like a threshold period of what you feel like you could sustain for a long period of time. It works really well for distance athletes, endurance athletes that would like to measure their VO2 max. You can see where you're at. Then you can assign a training zone, right? And say, I'm going to go 70% of my VO2 max for an hour and see if I can sustain that. And by training in that threshold, you can bump up your VO2 max to improve and improve and improve. So it works really well for people that are in competition and things like that. They can do that. But in everyday practice, really, like, you don't need to know that kind of stuff because your rate of perceived fitness, like what you feel like you're going through, can be measured as well. I could just have you run on a treadmill and just say, okay, on a scale of 1.
How do you feel?
How do you feel? On a scale of 1 to 10, are you 10, you're totally out of breath and you're going to pass out? Or where are you at? And if you give me a 7, then I know, okay, that's a great training zone for you, right? So you don't really have to have these gadgets and everything to measure as a coach or even just a person. You can just say, okay, well, I'm going to train at this level. Yeah. And that 70%, 80% zone is pretty good for endurance, unless it's ultra. Ultra, you're gonna bump it down quite a bit because you have to sustain that for hours at a time. For me, honestly, I like to go that 100% until I can't, until my body says I need to stop.
I'm done,
and then I stop.
Well, that's how you learn what your body's capable of.
Geez, you do. Yeah. And then you shake, and you feel like you're going to pass out, and then you regain it. And then I can go again, right? And that's just personal preference on how you want to train your body. Yep. But that's a little bit about VO2 max. We could literally go into more science, but I want to bore you forever.
Okay, well, that's a good question. Yeah. So here's another one then. Shane, besides your brain injury, what do you consider your lowest point in life? And what did you do about it? And we could ask both of you this question.
Sure.
So my lowest point in life, besides my brain injury, and maybe even more than my brain injury, was when I overdosed on methadone, and it was just a dark time in my life. Like, I don't remember everything about when I overdosed, but I remember where I was, and it was in these people's house, and they were all on drugs also, and when I overdosed, they, I guess, like didn't